So I'm Cynthia Balusek, Director of Client Experience at Bigcommerce, and I also work with Meg. So you already heard what Bigcommerce does, so I won't take you through that. It's all the same things she said. And I'm actually going to talk about not my time at Bigcommerce, but at a time at a different company I worked for, where I had the amazing job of leading a support team. And there are things that I learned from that experience that I take with me on a day-to-day basis at my job at Bigcommerce, where I'm on the client success side of things. So I'm going to share with you my story there, some key takeaways from that, and what I would and hopefully you'll learn something from that too. So I live in Austin, work for Bigcommerce, all that kind of good stuff. So when I joined the support team, the relationship between the client success team and the support team was really, really fragmented. And I like to think of it as I was in a boxing ring every day with boxing gloves. And I was getting yelled at by clients, and I was getting yelled at by my own internal client success management team. And it was really, really terrible. And it was completely warranted, just to be really, really clear. Our support was awful. It was beyond awful. Our first response time was 2 weeks. Like you put in, yeah, I know, like it's humiliating. It wasn't that when I left. So I did leave it in much better shape. We had like an 8-day backlog, and if you called us, 40% of the time you'd go to voicemail. So no wonder our client success team was angry, and our clients were angry. Totally justified. But at the end of the day, I got everyone to hang up their boxing gloves, and that was pretty awesome. So the first thing we did that I've tried to do in every company I've worked for since was something we really did out of desperation. Because we were so understaffed, we actually got the client success team to come in and answer phones for 2 hours a day, once every 2 weeks. So just 2 hours once every 2 weeks. And it was phenomenal. And again, we did this out of desperation. This is not how you should staff your support team, but it worked. And what it really did at the end of the day was give our client success team a real insight into what the support team does every day, as well as the support team felt like the client success team understood what they did and the pressures that they were under. And it was phenomenal. So I don't know how many of you have listened to your support teams, but it's a really tough job. No one calls support because they're having a really amazing day and your product works awesomely, right? They're unhappy, they're frustrated, they're not being successful in your product, and they want help with that. And they may not be in the best of mood when they call. So something I've tried to do in every company I've worked for since then is have that exposure and experience. And at Bigcommerce, what our support team did that I thought was really, really awesome, they actually put a support agent in a conference room with anyone who wanted to come in and listen, and he took calls live from that conference room, which is actually incredibly intimidating, and kudos to that support agent. But a great way to have that experience without having to go through scheduling one-on-one sessions. The second thing I did, because I came into such a mess, we had a lot of escalations, and we had no escalation process whatsoever. So I had to develop one really, really quickly. And what we landed on was I had office hours twice a day for 30 minutes, 8:30 and 1 o'clock. And client success managers would call in with their case number and tell me why they needed to escalate a case, and I would prioritize those and get those resolved. And it was pretty awful. I would come in at 8:30 in the morning, which is early, because I have kids, and get yelled at for like a good half hour and start off my day that way. And sometimes I'd dial in and there'd be 10 people on the call. And again, every reason to be frustrated, totally understand where they're coming from. But what I really appreciated is that 95% of those people followed the process. It reduced the number of emails I got, reduced the number of drive-bys the team had, and helped everybody. And I would say 95% except for one guy whose name I'm not gonna reveal, but I'll call him Bob. And Bob would not follow the process if I had paid him to do it. He would instant message my team, and he would come on by, and he would send emails. And he would send emails to me, and my boss, and their boss, and his boss. And I spent more time managing Bob than I ever did working on a single thing for his clients. The only advantage I had is that Bob had a really, really loud voice. So when he would come over to my team and be like, hey, I would hear him, and I would jump out like this cat out of my office. I mean, I would be on a call with people. I would put them on hold, and I would walk out and find out what Bob needed and divert Bob away from my team. When you run a support team, processes are so important because they help you prioritize. So if you've got, I see some nodding, thank you. Yeah, so if your support team has an escalation process, please follow it. And if it's not working for you, please work with your support leadership to figure out what you can do to make that different or better. At the end of the day, we stopped doing the calls, which was nice, and developed a different process. So don't be a Bob.
Did you have engineers do a little bit of support? 2 hours every other week or half an hour every other week?
We did originally at the beginning of this company, and my husband's company. My husband's a software engineer. He works for WP Engine, which is an awesome place. And they do that. We don't do that at Bigcommerce because our engineering team's in a different location, but it's totally worth it. So I do recommend that. Okay, and then the final thing was, I'll never forget, I get called into the CTO's office with the director of client success and one of the client success managers. I'm just waiting to get yelled at about whatever the thing is. And I realized about 5 minutes into this meeting that they've brought me in to discuss a bug that wasn't getting solved, a bug that was really important to a client. And the reason they've brought me here is not to yell at me further about this situation, but I needed help. I couldn't get this bug resolved. And so they were appealing to the CTO and using their power and their voice and their strength to help me get that resolved. And I realized I had a huge resource in the client success team that I was totally not using to my advantage. They knew the clients better than I did. They knew the business impact of bugs and support cases on them. And that's data and information and a second voice I could use to help get things resolved. And this is just some salary information from Glassdoor. Those of you who've worked in support departments know sometimes support isn't the most glamorous of departments in a company. And I had a boss who referred to it as being at the end of the parade. And it's sad and somewhat true. And support people make half of what client success managers make, according to this Glassdoor survey, which may or may not apply to your particular situation. But if you think about power equals money, then client success managers have a ton of power, and you can help your support team with that. I, after that experience, got really smart about things like bugs. Oh, your client's really mad about this bug. We didn't solve this bug, and that bug had a $2 million impact on your client. Can you write that in the bug itself for me? Thanks so much, dear account manager. And that worked great. And then I was always really happy to help the client success team too. I was always super happy to get on the phone with them and explain to them how awful our support was and how I was going to make that better. And after about a year, people stopped yelling at me. My job got a lot more fun. But the other thing I was super proud of is how many of my team members went to other departments. And apparently this slide is also in the ending keynote, so just act really surprised when you see it. But this is from the TSIA, saying that basically your support team members are a great resource for you. Your future hires on your client success teams will come from support, depending on your model. And I think that's such an amazing thing. And then finally, we live in Texas. We really like margaritas. We had a get-together with the client success team, and they were spread out all over the country, but once a quarter came into town. And we literally drug a frozen margarita machine into the middle of my support team because they couldn't get off the phones, right? But we would take turns getting off the phones, having a margarita, mingling. The phone would ring, somebody would go back and answer it. Because at that point, we answered the phone all of the time, not just 60%. And it was a great experience. We had some downtime with them. We had some downtime with them in a way that was really meaningful and worked for everybody, and it wasn't a happy hour that some people could go or not go. So if you're not doing events with your support team now that help kind of build bridges and build relationships, it's something to consider. Okay. And that's it for me.
So if you have questions for either of us, we have a little bit of time to go to your next session, and we're happy to answer any of your questions.
Just organizationally, do you guys prefer or see any benefit of having both customer success and customer support report up to the same executive, or?
Well, it's funny you asked that. That is actually something that's on the table for us now organizationally, because we have a VP of client support, which we call client success, and then we have our client experience teams. And we're looking at that. Does it make sense to bring the teams together? And we're doing some pilot integration programs.
Okay. So right now they're not, and
Yeah.
support rolls up to operations, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And like Cynthia was saying, it's actually our recruiting ground for client experience. And so it's a great career path, but again, we're looking to see, would it make sense as one organization? And we're looking at it first from the lens of the client experience versus just kind of operational efficiency.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
How do you align the customer experience, customer success goals with the product team? Great question. So very aligned in that for all of our execs, retention is a key metric. So it's not just focused on top-line sales and EBITDA or some profit measure and net promoter, but it's also retention, which is a fairly new change for us, because previously product would say, hey, I'm releasing product on time, and sales like, I hit my quota, and then it was really uncomfortable owning that retention number, and it's like, but you didn't build the product I needed, and you sold to clients that were really hard for me to make successful. So now everybody has the retention metric, which actually drives our bonuses. So big alignment there. Anyone else?
Sorry, just one more question.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on compensation for customer support versus customer success as you start aligning those two organizations?
I'm gonna let you take that one.
I think it's hard. So support teams, many of the companies I've worked for, support teams are compensated on things like upsells, and that's somewhat of a sticky, or that can be a slippery slope. if you think about what the role of a support team is to help the client that's on the phone. Do you want them to pitch an additional service on the phone that's related to what they're talking about or unrelated? I think I've never worked for a company where I felt like, oh my gosh, we've totally nailed this and it all makes a lot of sense. I will say I think it's interesting that the compensation difference is so dramatic. At the company that I worked at before that I was discussing, I actually had engineers on my team who were very well compensated, but that's not always the case. And I think one of the great things about that is it does give a really wonderful opportunity for support team members to move into client success. That is an upward path. And support teams have a really high turnover. So it's a great opportunity to keep really smart people in your organization and not lose them outside the organization.
Maybe I need to rephrase that question.
Sorry.
Do you see customer support being aligned to the metrics that customer success is compensated on? Not.
Oh, gotcha.
It may still be
the same. Okay.
It may still make half of it, but is there any thought? And maybe it's a separate discussion.
Well, the way previously the way we managed, we looked a lot at efficiency, so call handle times, and every incident had a customer success or kind of an NPS score. And now we've relaxed some of that operational efficiency to say, hey, take time, go ahead and ask, is there anything else I can help you with? Or if you look in the system and say, hey, they're obviously trying to get started, rather than referring them over to client success to get them onboarded, go ahead and take a little bit of time to onboard them. So I would say we're seeing a merging of what teams are doing, and I think that'll have some impact on how they're paid and how they're bonused. And we're still figuring it out. Good. Yeah, so this comes down to really getting our Totango data and our Salesforce data working well together. And we can identify a client population, and then based on the type of client population they are, then we put them into a very structured email flow. Those email flows started out as being time-based, but as we got smarter with our own product data and our own Totango data, it became more about you've done certain things in the product. We can already tell by both the questions you answered when you were first initially profiled as a prospect, where you declared yourself, I'm an enterprise client, or I'm a wannabe startup. You declared some things about yourself. We put you in a certain population, so it was about your criteria. And then as you started doing things, your behavior you drive some of that communication. And then we had to figure out what to be sending you guys. Right behind you? So we're doing it in 3 different ways. We're experimenting with in-product messaging, which is by far great because it's right there and it's right at that moment. We've also used HubSpot, and we're experimenting we have a pilot going with Totango. So we actually have kind of different paths, different tools. And I would say we've got work to do on that. Yes, you're laughing. I totally am with you. Go ahead in the back.
Yeah, so support people are really, there's no gray area for them, and they're not particularly wonderful salespeople always either, because for them it's a fact, and you press the button, it does this, and there's not a ton of drawing outside the box for them or coloring outside the lines for them. And if you're a CSM, I think CSMs tend to be a little bit more salesy, a little bit more flowery language, and sometimes much better storytellers, right? And we would have tension on calls where a client would ask a question. The answer is no, right? But you can answer it like this, no. Or you can say, I think what we really want to do is this, right? And what they're asking isn't necessarily what they're really asking. They may be asking if you have this feature, but really their need is something different that can be solved with something else you have in the product. So support people are really good about digging into what that is, but their delivery isn't always as great. And I'm generalizing, so your experiences may differ. But a lot of times we would have, and whenever we could, we would have meetings in rooms together where we could physically see each other and mute the phone to prevent somebody from talking if we needed to. Or just even give us like a split second to, I'm gonna take this because I've got a better way to do it. Or like, no, we can't do any of that. And that helped immensely. It is more difficult with a remote team or a virtual team because you don't have that nonverbal communication when you have the client on the phone.
We have time for one more question. You guys have it?
So let me share something that I heard at lunch because I was really smart. And and this goes back to the question you asked for Cynthia. It's not that we're trying to turn our client success teams into salespeople because they don't really want to be salespeople. But it is helping them realize that clients are going to buy from people that they trust. And if you can use that moment where you've delivered some great value to your client and they do trust you, then you can suggest something. If you can get your client success teams to understand that by suggesting something, whether it's try a new app or expand this usage of your product or try this service, it will actually help our clients be successful, then they can get excited about that and it doesn't come off being salesy.
All right, round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you.